What if the next 5 months of your life are important for a reason you have not yet considered? Not because you must accomplish something extraordinary, not because you are running out of time, and not because some invisible clock is counting down toward a future you must somehow control. What if these months matter because they are offering you an opportunity to change the place within yourself from which you live? Perhaps you have been thinking about your future more than usual. You wonder where your life is going. You wonder whether something will finally change. You may look at your relationships, your work, your age, your dreams, or simply the way you feel when you wake up in the morning and quietly ask yourself, is this really how my life is supposed to feel? There may be nothing obviously wrong, and yet something within you feels tired. Tired of thinking so much. Tired of trying to understand everything. Tired of waiting for certainty. Tired of carrying conversations that ended months or even years ago. Tired of wondering what other people think of you. Tired of trying to arrange the future so carefully that nothing painful can ever surprise you again. And beneath all of that effort, there may be a very simple longing. You want to feel peaceful again. This is where the next 5 months can become meaningful, but perhaps not in the way the ego would first imagine. The ego hears the words "your future" and immediately begins making plans. It asks what must be achieved, what must be fixed, who must change, what must happen, and how quickly everything can be brought under control. It looks toward tomorrow and says, once I get there, then I will be all right. But there is another voice within you. It is quieter. It does not frighten you into action. It does not compare your journey with anyone else's. It does not tell you that you are behind. It simply reminds you that peace has never lived in tomorrow. Peace can only be encountered here. And perhaps this is one of the most important things you can remember during the months ahead. Your future is not merely a destination waiting somewhere in the distance. Your future is being shaped by the consciousness you bring into this moment. Consider how often you have postponed your peace. You may have told yourself, when this relationship becomes easier, I will relax. Or, when I know what is going to happen, I will stop worrying. Perhaps you have thought, when they finally understand me, I can let this go. Or, when life gives me some sign that everything will work out, then I will trust. These thoughts seem reasonable. Yet without realizing it, they place the key to your inner peace somewhere outside of you. Now, another person must behave correctly before you can be peaceful. A circumstance must change before you can feel whole. The future must reveal itself before you can trust life. And this is how we can spend years waiting for permission to become what we already are beneath the noise. Imagine standing beside a river and insisting that the water becomes still before you allow yourself to feel calm. The river cannot make that promise. It will rise and fall. It will move quickly in some places and gently in others. Branches will fall into it. Storms will disturb it. Sunlight will dance across it. Life is much the same. You cannot ask life to stop being life before you decide to become peaceful. There will always be something you cannot predict. Someone may misunderstand you. A plan may change. A relationship may take a direction you did not expect. You may lose something you thought you needed. A door you wanted may remain closed. Another may open before you feel ready to walk through it. The question is not whether you can arrange the river perfectly. The deeper question is whether you can learn to remain connected to yourself while the river moves. Perhaps this is what your future is quietly asking of you now. Not what can you acquire in 5 months, but what are you willing to stop carrying? What if you carried 5 months less resentment? 5 months less judgment? 5 months less need to prove yourself? What if you stopped rehearsing arguments in your mind with people who are not even in the room? What if you noticed the moment fear began creating stories about tomorrow and gently returned to what is actually happening now? Imagine what might become visible when all that inner noise begins to soften. There is a part of you that has been present through every season of your life. It was there before you learned to compare yourself, before you decided that someone else's approval determined your value, before disappointment taught you to protect your heart, before fear convinced you that controlling everything was the safest way to live. You do not have to manufacture this deeper self. You may simply have to remember it. Think about the sky for a moment. A storm can become so intense that the entire sky appears dark. If you were looking only at the clouds, you might believe darkness had taken over everything. Yet beyond those clouds, the vastness of the sky remains untouched. Your thoughts can be like those clouds. Fear can be a cloud. Resentment can be a cloud. Regret can be a cloud. The story that you are behind in life can be a cloud. But you are not necessarily the cloud. There is an awareness within you capable of noticing the cloud. And the moment you become aware of fear rather than completely identified with fear, something changes, perhaps only slightly at first. But that small distance between you and the thought creates space. And in that space, you have a choice. You can continue feeding the old story, or you can become still enough to hear something deeper. This is why awareness can quietly transform a life. You may still have uncertain circumstances. You may still have questions without answers. You may still have memories that hurt when they return. Spiritual awareness does not require pretending. Those things do not exist. It simply means they no longer have to decide who you are. Maybe someone hurt you deeply. Perhaps you have replayed what happened countless times. You imagine what you should have said. You wonder why they did it. Part of you may even believe that holding on to the pain protects you from being hurt again. But notice what happens when resentment remains within you. The person may no longer be present, yet the conversation continues. The event ended, yet emotionally you keep returning to the same room. This does not mean you should force yourself to forgive before you are ready. Forgiveness is not pretending something was acceptable. It is not giving someone permission to mistreat you again. Perhaps forgiveness begins much more gently. It begins when you realize that you no longer want yesterday to occupy so much of today. You begin to see that releasing resentment is not primarily a gift you give another person. It is a way of opening your own hands. You have been holding something tightly for so long that you forgot how much energy it required. And when the hand finally opens, there is space again. Space for peace. Space for love. Space for life. This is the kind of change that could make the next 5 months profoundly different from the 5 months that came before them. Not because every circumstance becomes perfect, but because you stop requiring perfection in order to feel connected to life. There is a beautiful difference between intention and control. Intention says, this is the direction my heart is calling me toward. Control says, life must take me there exactly the way I have imagined. Intention leaves room for wisdom. Control leaves room only for fear. You can plant a seed with intention. You can water the soil. You can give it sunlight. You can care for it faithfully. But you cannot pull on the seed every morning and demand that it become a flower faster. Nature does not hurry that way. A tree does not compare itself with another tree and wonder why its branches are not as high. A river does not become ashamed because its path curves. The seasons do not apologize for changing. And perhaps you were never meant to live in constant resistance to your own season either. Maybe where you are right now is not a mistake. Maybe this uncertainty is showing you where you have been seeking security outside yourself. Maybe this exhaustion is revealing what you are finally ready to stop carrying. Maybe the discomfort you feel is not always evidence that life has abandoned you. Sometimes discomfort appears when an old way of being no longer fits the person you are beginning to remember. And that is why these coming months do not need to become a race. They can become a return from fear to awareness, from resentment to forgiveness, from control to trust, from judgment to compassion, from constant mental noise to the quiet presence underneath it, and from the identity you have struggled to maintain to the deeper self that never needed to prove anything in the first place. You do not need to know tonight exactly what your life will look like 5 months from now. In fact, perhaps that is part of the invitation. Can you allow some of the future to remain unknown? Can you walk without demanding that the entire road reveal itself? When you drive through darkness, the headlights do not illuminate the whole journey. They reveal only enough road for the next movement. And somehow, that is enough to travel hundreds of miles. Perhaps life has always worked more like this than we wanted to admit. You receive enough light for this moment, enough awareness for this choice, enough love for this conversation, enough courage to release one old thought, enough stillness to hear the quiet voice beneath the fear. And then another part of the road appears. So as you enter these next 5 months, perhaps you can hold one question close to your heart. Not, what will happen to me? But who am I when I stop allowing fear to tell me who I must be? Because there are things you may be carrying that cannot travel with you into a more peaceful way of living. There are old identities you may no longer need. There are judgments that have become too heavy. There are expectations that have turned into prisons. There are relationships with the past that may be asking to be released. And there may be a version of you beneath all of this that has been waiting patiently, not to be created, but to be remembered. The next 5 months may not decide your future because of what you manage to control. They may become important because of what you finally become willing to release. And once you begin to see the difference between the voice of fear and the quiet wisdom within you, you may discover something surprising. The future you have been trying so hard to reach may begin with something far simpler. It may begin with coming home to yourself. And when you begin coming home to yourself, you may notice something that was difficult to see while you were busy trying to control everything. Much of what exhausted you was not life itself. It was the struggle with life. It was the inner argument with what had already happened, the fear of what might happen next, and the belief that peace could only arrive when everything finally matched your expectations. This is where the ego quietly enters the story. The ego does not always appear as arrogance or selfishness. Sometimes it appears as worry, sometimes as comparison, sometimes as the need to be understood, sometimes as the voice that says you must keep everyone happy or you will lose their love. Sometimes it appears as the endless attempt to predict every possible outcome so that you will never again be surprised by pain. And because these patterns often feel protective, you may not recognize them as forms of fear. Imagine waking up in the morning and immediately reaching for your thoughts about the future. Before your feet even touch the floor, the mind begins its work. What needs to happen today? What could go wrong? Why has that person not responded? What if the situation never changes? What if you made the wrong decision? What if everyone else is moving forward while you remain exactly where you are? Nothing has happened yet. The morning is still quiet. Light may be entering through the window. The world may be almost completely still. Yet within your mind, you are already living 10 different futures, most of which will never happen. This is one of the subtle ways fear takes us away from ourselves. It persuades us that constant thinking is the same thing as preparation. But perhaps you have noticed that overthinking rarely produces the peace it promises. You solve one imagined problem, and the mind creates another. You receive reassurance, and soon you need more reassurance. One uncertainty disappears, and another takes its place. The ego keeps saying, just solve this one more thing, and then you can rest. But the rest never arrives because the ego's survival depends upon there always being one more thing to solve. Awareness offers another possibility. Instead of asking, how do I stop every fearful thought, you can simply begin noticing the thought without immediately obeying it. You might hear the mind say, something is going to go wrong. And instead of entering into an argument with the thought, you can quietly recognize fear is speaking. That small act of awareness is more powerful than it appears. The moment you can observe a thought, you are no longer completely trapped inside it. There is the thought, and there is the awareness, noticing the thought. There is fear, and there is something within you capable of witnessing fear. There is anger, and there is something deeper that can notice anger without becoming nothing but anger. Perhaps that witnessing presence is closer to your true nature than all the stories passing through your mind. Think again of the sky. Clouds move across it continuously. Some are light, some are dark, some bring storms. But the sky does not chase them away, and it does not cling to the beautiful ones. It allows them to move. Your inner life can begin to feel this way. A thought arrives. You notice it. A feeling rises. You allow yourself to feel it. A memory returns. You acknowledge it. And then, rather than building an identity around it, you allow movement. This does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean ignoring genuine problems. It means learning the difference between responding to reality and suffering inside stories created about reality. Suppose someone you care about becomes distant. There is the reality. Their behavior has changed. And then there is everything the mind may add. They don't value me. I must have done something wrong. I am going to be abandoned. I always lose the people I love. I need to make them understand how much this hurts. Soon, one change in another person's behavior has awakened an entire identity built around fear. You may begin sending messages you do not really want to send. You may explain yourself repeatedly. You may become angry because underneath the anger is terror. Or perhaps you become whatever you believe the other person wants you to be, hoping that if you are agreeable enough, helpful enough, quiet enough, attractive enough, or understanding enough, they will stay. This is where people-pleasing can become a spiritual teacher. At first, people-pleasing looks like kindness. You want others to be comfortable. You want harmony. You do not want to disappoint anyone. But kindness and self-abandonment are not the same thing. Love does not require you to disappear. You may begin noticing how often you say yes when something within you quietly says no. How often you apologize for having needs. How often you measure your worth by another person's mood. And perhaps one day you see the pattern clearly. You are not merely trying to make people happy. You are trying to control whether they reject you. That realization can be uncomfortable, but it can also be freeing, because now the question changes. Instead of asking, how can I make sure they approve of me? You begin asking, can I remain connected to myself even when someone does not understand me? That is a very different way of living. You can still be loving. You can still listen. You can still apologize when you have caused harm. But you no longer have to exchange your inner peace for approval. This is one of the invitations the next 5 months may place before you, to notice every place where you have been abandoning yourself in order to manage someone else's perception of you. You may discover that freedom sometimes looks surprisingly ordinary. It may look like not explaining yourself one more time. It may look like allowing someone to have an opinion about you without rushing to correct it. It may look like saying no gently. It may look like leaving a conversation before resentment takes over. It may look like choosing silence when the ego wants the last word. There is enormous peace in realizing that you do not have to attend every argument you are invited into. The ego loves being right because being right strengthens the identity it has built. It says, if I can prove that I am right, then I will feel better. Perhaps you have experienced this in a relationship. You remember exactly what was said. You remember the date. You remember the tone of voice. You can present the evidence perfectly. And maybe you are right. But there is another question worth asking. What is being right costing you? Sometimes we win the argument and lose our peace. Sometimes we hold on to the evidence long after the relationship has ended because the ego wants a final verdict confirming that we were the injured one and the other person was wrong. Pain deserves acknowledgement. Boundaries matter. Harm should not be disguised as spirituality. But after the lesson has been understood and the boundary has been established, there comes a moment when carrying the case becomes heavier than releasing it. You may not receive the apology you wanted. You may never receive the explanation. Someone may never understand what they did to you. And this is where the ego says, then you cannot move on. But something deeper within you whispers, your freedom does not require their participation. Imagine carrying a stone everywhere because someone placed it in your hands years ago. At first, the stone represents what happened. You hold it because the experience mattered. You do not want anyone to minimize it. But after many years, the person who gave you the stone may be gone while you are still carrying it. Eventually, the question is no longer whether the stone was real. The question becomes whether you still want to carry it. Forgiveness begins there, not as approval, not as forgetting, not as returning to a harmful situation, but as the quiet decision that the past will no longer determine the quality of your present consciousness. You open your hand, and the stone falls. Perhaps nobody sees it happen. There may be no dramatic moment, but inside you, something becomes lighter. The ego also creates suffering through comparison. You look around and notice someone who appears further along. They seem happier, their relationship looks easier, their family seems closer, they appear more confident. Perhaps they are younger and seem to have already discovered what you are still trying to understand. And almost instantly, your own life begins to feel smaller. This is one of comparison's strangest qualities. Nothing about your actual life has changed. Yet after looking at someone else's life, you suddenly experience yours differently. The tree does not do this. An oak does not look at a flowering tree and conclude that it has failed because it produces no blossoms. The river does not become ashamed because another river reaches the ocean by a shorter path. Nature seems to understand something the human ego repeatedly forgets. Different expressions do not require comparison. Your path does not need to resemble another person's path in order to have meaning. Perhaps some of your greatest suffering has come from trying to live according to a timetable that was never yours. By this age, I should have found the right person. By now, I should understand my purpose. I should be further along. I should be healed. I should know what I am doing. Listen carefully to the emotional weight hidden inside the word should. It turns life into a courtroom. Every day becomes evidence for or against your worth. But what if your life is not a trial? What if this season is not proof that you are behind? There are seeds that remain beneath the soil long before anything appears above the ground. From the surface, nothing seems to be happening. Yet beneath the earth, roots are forming. Some periods of your life may be like that. You may think nothing is changing because you cannot see visible evidence. But perhaps you are learning to stop chasing approval. Perhaps you are becoming less reactive. Perhaps you are beginning to recognize fear before it controls your behavior. Perhaps you are learning to sit alone without believing loneliness means something is wrong with you. These changes may not impress the world, but they transform the person who meets the world, and that transformation matters. Over the next 5 months, you may find yourself tempted to measure your progress by what has happened externally. Has the relationship changed? Has the uncertainty disappeared? Have all your questions been answered? But there is another way to measure your journey. You might ask whether you recover your peace more quickly after being disturbed, whether you can notice resentment without feeding it for days, whether you can hear criticism without allowing it to define your identity, whether you can feel uncertainty without immediately trying to control everyone around you, whether you can see someone else's happiness and bless it without using it as evidence against your own life. These are quiet transformations, and because they are quiet, the ego often overlooks them. The ego wants dramatic evidence. Awareness notices subtle freedom. There is another pattern worth noticing: the desire to control outcomes. Control often begins innocently. You care about something deeply, so naturally you want it to work out. You love someone, so you want the relationship to survive. You make a decision, so you want reassurance that it was correct. You have a dream, so you want life to unfold in the way you imagined. There is nothing wrong with caring. The suffering begins when care becomes attachment. Attachment says, this must happen this way, or I cannot be at peace. And suddenly your peace has become conditional. You may call it hope, but underneath there is tension. You may call it planning, but underneath there is fear. You may call it love, but underneath there may be possession. There is a difference between loving someone and needing them to behave according to your expectations so that you can feel safe. There is a difference between having an intention and demanding a specific result. A gardener can prepare the soil, plant the seed, provide water, and protect the young plant. But there is a point where the gardener must trust something beyond personal control. No amount of anxiety can force the seed to open. Life contains this same mystery. You participate. You listen. You choose. You act when action feels aligned. And then there are moments when you must allow. Allowing is difficult for the ego because allowing feels like losing control. But surrender is not defeat. Surrender can be the recognition that you were never responsible for controlling the entire universe in the first place. Think about how exhausting it is to mentally manage other people. You want them to understand. You want them to choose differently. You want them to recognize your value. You want them to heal. You want them to stop making the same mistakes. Sometimes this comes from genuine love. But love becomes heavy when it carries the belief, I am responsible for your path. You are allowed to care deeply without taking ownership of another person's journey. You are allowed to love someone and still let them learn what only their own life can teach them. And you are allowed to release the belief that your peace depends upon their transformation. This can be especially difficult in families. You may have spent years playing a role. The responsible one, the peacemaker, the strong one, the one who never asks for help, the one who keeps everyone together. Eventually you may forget that it is a role. You begin believing it is who you are. Then one day you feel exhausted and wonder why. Perhaps because some part of you has been performing for so long that it has forgotten how to simply be. The ego creates identities because identities feel safe. I am the successful one. I am the rejected one. I am the victim. I am the caretaker. I am the person who always struggles. I am the one nobody understands. Even painful identities can become familiar enough that we defend them. And awareness begins asking a very gentle question. Who would you be without the story? Not without your memories, not without what you have learned, but without the need to continually use the past to explain who you are now. There may be a silence after that question. Stay there for a moment, because the ego may not know how to answer. It knows your name. It knows your history. It knows your accomplishments and disappointments. It knows what people have said about you. It knows your age. It knows the mistakes you regret. It knows all the labels. But beneath all those descriptions, something remains, something that was present before you had anything to prove. Perhaps you have felt it during a quiet walk, or while watching the ocean, or sitting beside someone you love without needing to speak. Perhaps you have felt it in the moments just before sleep, when the day's identities begin to loosen. For a brief moment, you are not trying to become anything. You simply are. And strangely, that can feel more complete than all the striving. This is why stillness matters. Not because silence magically removes every problem, but because silence allows you to hear what constant mental activity has been covering. The ego is loud. The deeper self rarely needs to shout. Fear rushes. Wisdom often waits. Fear says, decide now, or everything will fall apart. Wisdom says, become quiet enough to see clearly. Fear says, hold tighter. Wisdom says, notice what your gripping is doing to you. Fear says, you must know what happens next. Wisdom asks, can you trust the next step without seeing the entire path? Perhaps during the next 5 months, this distinction will become increasingly clear. You will begin recognizing the voice that creates contraction inside you, and you will begin recognizing the quieter presence that creates space. This does not mean fear disappears. You may still wake up anxious sometimes. You may still compare yourself. You may still want someone else's approval. You may still become attached to outcomes. Spiritual growth does not mean never experiencing these patterns again. It may simply mean noticing them sooner. Instead of spending 5 days inside resentment, perhaps you notice it after 5 hours. Later, perhaps after 5 minutes. Eventually, there may come a moment when you feel the old reaction beginning, and something within you quietly says, I know where this road goes. I do not need to travel all the way down it again. That is awareness becoming freedom. There is no battle required. You do not have to defeat the ego. Trying to destroy the ego can simply become another ego project. You can notice it with compassion. When fear appears, perhaps you can say inwardly, I see you. You are trying to protect me. When comparison appears, I see you. When the need to control appears, I see you. When the desire to prove yourself appears, I see you. Awareness without condemnation begins dissolving what judgment strengthens. This is important because you cannot hate yourself into peace. You cannot shame yourself into awakening. Love must be present even in the way you meet your own fear. Imagine a frightened child standing at your door. Would you scream at the child for being afraid? Or would you sit beside them until they remembered they were safe? Perhaps your fearful mind deserves the same tenderness. You do not have to believe everything it says, but you can stop fighting it. And slowly, something begins changing. You realize that your inner world does not need to be perfect for you to experience peace. Peace is not the absence of every uncomfortable thought. Peace is the space that can hold those thoughts without becoming them. Like the ocean holding waves. Some waves are gentle, some rise unexpectedly, some crash with enormous force. But no wave can become the entire ocean. And no single emotion can become the entirety of you unless you forget the vastness underneath it. So when fear rises during these next months, remember the ocean. When uncertainty rises, remember the sky. When comparison appears, remember the trees. When you feel impatient with your life, remember the seed beneath the soil. Nature is constantly reminding you that movement does not require panic. Growth does not require self-rejection. Change does not require violence against who you are. And perhaps the future does not require nearly as much control as you once believed. There may come a moment when you realize that the life you have been trying to manage is also carrying you. Your heart beats without your instruction. Your breath arrives while you sleep. The seasons turn without your supervision. The earth continues its journey through space while you worry about whether one conversation will unfold exactly as you hoped. There is something humbling and beautiful about remembering this. You are participating in life. You are not running the entire universe. And perhaps that is good news. Perhaps you can put down some of the responsibility you never truly had. You can stop trying to control every person's opinion. You can stop demanding guarantees from tomorrow. You can stop comparing your season with someone else's. You can stop asking the past to become different. You can stop treating every fearful thought as prophecy. And in the space created by all that releasing, you may begin sensing something that has been there quietly all along. A presence, a stillness, a kind of inner intelligence that does not speak through panic. Some may call it spirit, some may call it the source, some may simply call it the deepest part of themselves. The name matters less than the experience. It is the feeling that you are not separate from life. It is the recognition that beneath all the roles, fears, expectations, and stories, there is something in you that remains whole. You have not lost it. You have simply been listening to so much noise that you could no longer hear it. And this is where the journey begins to change. Because once you recognize what the ego has been asking you to carry, another question naturally appears. What would happen if you began putting it down? What would happen if forgiveness replaced resentment? If trust replaced the demand for certainty? If intention replaced control? If love became more important than being right? If instead of spending the next 5 months trying to become someone worthy of peace, you began living from the possibility that the peaceful self you have been searching for is already within you, perhaps then the future would no longer feel like something approaching from the distance. Perhaps it would begin quietly here in the moment you remember who you are. If you begin to remember who you are, then something very gentle starts to happen. You no longer feel the same urgency to force every part of life into place. The future does not feel like an enemy that must be controlled. It begins to feel more like a path that reveals itself as you become quiet enough to walk it with awareness. This is where forgiveness becomes important. Not because you are trying to become morally superior. Not because you are pretending that painful things did not happen. Forgiveness matters because resentment keeps your inner world tied to a moment that has already passed. You may have someone in your life who hurt you deeply. Maybe it was a parent, a partner, a friend. Maybe it was someone who promised to stay and then disappeared. Maybe it was someone who never saw your value, even after you gave them everything you could. The pain was real. The disappointment was real. And perhaps part of you still wants them to understand what they did. This is where forgiveness can feel impossible because the ego interprets forgiveness as surrendering the truth. It says, if I forgive, then what happened did not matter. But perhaps forgiveness means something different. Perhaps it means what happened mattered, but it will no longer define the atmosphere of my inner life. There is a great difference between remembering something and continuing to live inside it. Imagine standing in a room where someone once wounded you. Years pass, and you keep returning to that room in your mind. You replay the conversation. You rearrange the words. You imagine different endings. Meanwhile, the rest of the house remains unexplored. Forgiveness may be the moment you finally open the door. You do not need to destroy the room. You do not need to deny what happened there. You simply decide that you no longer want to spend your entire life inside it. This is freedom. And perhaps during the next 5 months, there will be one memory that asks to be released in this way. You may not even need to speak to the person. Some forgiveness happens silently. You may sit alone and say inwardly, I release you from the role you have been playing in my mind. And then perhaps something else becomes possible. You release yourself. You release the version of yourself who believed that being hurt meant being unworthy. You release the belief that another person's inability to love you properly says something final about your value. You release the need to carry proof of what happened. You release the fantasy that one day the past will return and explain itself perfectly. Forgiveness can be a return to the present, and the present is where your life actually is. There is another form of forgiveness that can be even more difficult. Forgiving yourself. Many people carry old versions of themselves like secret burdens. You may remember something you said years ago, a decision you made while afraid, a relationship you stayed in too long, a person you could not love the way you wish you had, an opportunity you rejected, a mistake that still makes you wonder who you were back then. And the mind can become cruel. You should have known better. You wasted so much time. You ruined everything. But you are judging an earlier version of yourself with awareness that may not have existed at the time. What if you allowed yourself to see that person differently? What if you imagined meeting the version of you who made that mistake? Would you attack them? Or would you see how frightened they were? How much they wanted love? How little they understood? Perhaps self-forgiveness does not mean saying, everything I did was right. It means saying, I can learn without continuing to punish myself. A tree does not hate last year's branch because it grew in the wrong direction. It simply keeps reaching toward the light. You are allowed to do the same. You are allowed to become wiser without becoming your own enemy. There is a subtle freedom in deciding that shame will no longer be your teacher. Awareness can teach you. Compassion can teach you. Truth can teach you. You do not need self-hatred to become more conscious. And when you stop fighting yourself, you begin to have more energy for love. Love, in this sense, is not merely a feeling between people. It is a way of meeting life. It is the state in which you stop dividing the world into everything that supports your ego and everything that threatens it. Love allows. Love listens. Love does not need to win every moment. It does not ask you to become weak. It simply asks whether fear must be in charge. Imagine someone says something critical about you. Fear immediately wants to defend. The ego prepares its evidence. But there may be another possibility. You pause. You listen. If there is truth in what was said, you receive it. If there is no truth, you let it pass. This is not indifference. It is inner spaciousness. The person does not have to become wrong in order for you to remain at peace. This is how love can begin changing ordinary moments. You are standing in traffic. Someone cuts in front of you. The old response appears instantly. Anger, judgment. A story about how inconsiderate people are, and then awareness arrives. You recognize that you are about to sacrifice 10 peaceful minutes because of a stranger you will never see again. Suddenly the whole situation becomes almost humorous. You breathe. You let the car go. The world does not end, and your peace remains with you. Small moments like this matter because your spiritual life is not happening somewhere far away. It is happening in traffic, in the kitchen, in text message, in difficult conversations, in the few seconds between being triggered and reacting. Those moments reveal what you are practicing. The next 5 months may offer hundreds of these small doors. You do not need to walk through all of them perfectly. You simply begin noticing them. Perhaps today you notice one, tomorrow another, and little by little, your inner world becomes less governed by reaction. This is where intention becomes more meaningful than control. You can have an intention for these months without turning that intention into pressure. You might hold a simple intention such as, I want to live from peace. That intention will not tell you exactly what will happen, but it can become a compass. You enter a conversation and ask, what would peace sound like here? You make a decision and ask, am I choosing from fear or from clarity? You feel the need to please someone and ask, can I be loving without abandoning myself? You feel resentment and ask, is carrying this still serving me? These questions gently return you to yourself. They are not rules. They are invitations. A compass does not control the landscape. It simply helps you remember direction. Your intention can work the same way. And when you lose your direction, you do not need to condemn yourself. You simply return. Return to the breath. Return to awareness. Return to love. Return to the present moment. This returning may happen 1,000 times, and every return is part of the path. There is a tendency to imagine spiritual growth as a permanent arrival. You become peaceful and then remain peaceful forever. You forgive once and never feel resentment again. You trust once and never become afraid again. But perhaps life is more circular than that. You remember, then you forget, then you remember again. This does not mean you are failing. It means you are human. The ocean does not become less ocean because waves keep appearing. Your deeper self does not disappear because fear returns. You simply learn how to find your way home more quickly. This is why stillness can become such a powerful practice. Not as another task, not as something to perform correctly, just a few quiet moments in which you stop feeding the noise. You sit, you breathe, you allow the day to be unfinished. You allow questions to remain unanswered. You allow yourself to exist without solving anything. At first, the mind may resist. It may bring you every unfinished conversation and every concern. But if you remain patient, another layer can appear beneath the thinking, silence. And within that silence, you may notice that you are already okay in this moment. Not because everything has been resolved, but because this moment does not require the entire future to be resolved. It only asks you to be here. This is where trust begins. Trust is not certainty. Trust does not mean believing that everything will happen exactly as you want. Trust is something deeper. It is the willingness to remain open even when you cannot see the outcome. Think of a river. It moves toward the ocean without carrying a map. It bends around stones. It widens. It narrows. Sometimes it becomes still. Sometimes it moves rapidly. But it continues. There is no panic in the river. It does not say, this turn was not part of my plan. It simply responds to the landscape. Perhaps your life can become a little more like this. There may be turns you did not expect. There may be delays. There may be endings that feel unfair. But you are still moving, And sometimes what looks like a detour is part of the path. You may lose a relationship and later realize that you are losing yourself inside it. You may leave a place that once felt safe and discover a part of yourself you could not meet there. You may reach an age you once feared and discover that clarity becomes more valuable than youth. Life has strange ways of teaching us that what we called loss was sometimes space being created. This does not mean every loss should be romanticized. Grief deserves tenderness. If you have lost someone, you know that spiritual language cannot erase absence. You may still wake up wanting to hear their voice. You may still think of them at unexpected moments. Healing does not require you to stop missing them, but even grief can slowly become a different kind of relationship. At first, the loss feels like an empty room. Later, memory enters, then gratitude, then perhaps a quiet sense that love is still present, even though its form has changed. This is one of the mysteries of love. Form changes, love can remain, and perhaps this is part of what it means to live in harmony with the source. You begin to trust that life is larger than the forms you are attached to. Relationships change, bodies age, homes change, dreams evolve, people come and go, but there is a deeper current beneath the changing forms. You may call it love. You may call it consciousness. You may call it God or source. Whatever word feels natural to you, perhaps you have experienced it. It is the quiet sense that life is more connected than it appears. You feel it when you are deeply present with another person. You feel it in nature. You feel it when forgiveness suddenly becomes possible. You feel it when you stop defending yourself and discover you are still whole. And perhaps the next 5 months can become a practice in returning to that connection. You may begin each morning with a simple question. What energy do I want to bring into this day? Not what do I need to accomplish? Not what do I need to control? What do I want to bring? Peace? Kindness? Patience? Courage? You carry the energy before you know what the day will ask of you. This changes your relationship with life. Instead of asking the world to create your inner state, you begin bringing your inner state into the world. That is a profound shift. You walk into a difficult conversation already connected to peace. You enter uncertainty already connected to trust. You meet criticism already connected to your deeper worth. This does not mean circumstances cannot affect you. Of course they can, but they no longer have complete authority over who you become. This is inner freedom, and perhaps this freedom has always been closer than you thought. You do not have to travel anywhere to find it. You do not have to wait until your life becomes easier. You may simply begin noticing what separates you from it. Resentment separates. Comparison separates. Fear separates. The need to control separates. And every time you release one of these patterns, even for a moment, something natural returns. Peace, not peace created by effort. Peace uncovered, like sunlight appearing when clouds move. You did not create the sun. You simply stopped mistaking the clouds for the whole sky. Your true self may be like that. You are not building it. You are uncovering it. And this can change how you think about the future. Instead of asking, who do I need to become in the next 5 months, you can ask, what am I willing to release so that who I truly am can become more visible? Maybe you release the belief that everyone must understand you. Maybe you release the need to know exactly where your life is going. Maybe you release the old story that you are too late. Maybe you release one resentment. Maybe you release the habit of comparing your path. Maybe you release the belief that being alone means being unwanted. And every release creates space. Space is where new life begins. A garden cannot receive new seeds if every inch of soil is occupied by what has already died. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is clear the ground. This can feel uncomfortable because old patterns, even painful ones, are familiar. You know how to worry. You know how to replay the past. You know how to prepare for disappointment. Trust may feel unfamiliar. Peace may even feel suspicious at first. You may catch yourself wondering, what am I forgetting? Nothing. You are simply learning that calm is not negligence. You do not have to be anxious to be responsible. You do not have to suffer to prove that you care. You do not have to worry about someone to love them. This realization can change relationships. Imagine loving someone without trying to control their path. Imagine being available without becoming responsible for their emotional state. Imagine allowing people to be where they are while you remain where you are. This is love with freedom, and freedom allows love to breathe. The ego often mistakes attachment for love. It says, if you love me, you must stay. If you love me, you must agree. If you love me, you must make me feel secure. But perhaps love says something gentler. I see you. I honor your path. I will not abandon myself in order to keep you. And I will not demand that you abandon yourself in order to keep me. That is a different kind of relationship. It is not based on possession. It is based on presence. And this kind of presence begins with yourself. Can you sit with yourself without immediately seeking distraction? Can you notice sadness without calling yourself weak? Can you feel uncertainty without rushing toward anyone who will temporarily remove it? Can you enjoy your own company? These are not small questions, because when you become less afraid of your own presence, you stop demanding that other people rescue you from it. Then relationships can become expressions of love instead of escape from loneliness. This is one of the great gifts of reconnecting with your true self. You discover that solitude and loneliness are not always the same. Loneliness says, something is missing. Solitude can say, something is here. You are here. Life is here. Silence is here. The source is here. And perhaps in this quiet space, purpose begins to look different. You may have spent years trying to discover your purpose as though it were one perfect job or one great achievement hidden somewhere in the future. But perhaps purpose begins much closer. What if your purpose in this moment is to bring love into whatever is already in front of you? To listen completely, to forgive, to create, to encourage, to bring peace into a room that has forgotten peace. Purpose may not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it is simply the quality of presence you bring. You may never know how one gentle sentence changes another person's day. You may never know what your patience teaches a child. You may never see what your forgiveness interrupts in a family pattern. You may never understand how choosing love in one small moment changes what happens next. This is why the next 5 months can matter without becoming dramatic. Transformation often looks ordinary while it is happening. A morning when you do not reach immediately for your worry. A conversation where you listen rather than defend. A night when you forgive yourself. A moment when comparison appears and you bless another person's path instead. A decision made from inner clarity rather than panic. 5 months contain thousands of moments like these. And perhaps your future is formed far more by these quiet choices of consciousness than by the dramatic events you have been waiting for. You may still not know what is coming. That is all right. You do not need complete certainty to walk with trust. The seed does not know what the garden will look like. It simply responds to light. Perhaps that is enough for you too. Respond to what brings you closer to love. Respond to what brings you closer to truth. Respond to what creates peace without requiring you to betray yourself. And when you do not know what to do, become still. Sometimes the most important guidance does not arrive as an answer. It arrives as the disappearance of panic. You suddenly see the situation differently. The person has not changed. The circumstances may not have changed, but the fear around them has softened. Now you can choose. This is alignment, not controlling life, meeting life from the deepest part of yourself. And perhaps this is what living in harmony with the source feels like. You stop pushing against every current. You stop treating every closed door as rejection. You stop believing every delay is punishment. You become available to the possibility that life knows pathways your ego cannot yet see. There may be something ahead of you that requires you to arrive without the old resentment. There may be a relationship that requires you to stop abandoning yourself. There may be a new season that cannot begin until you release the identity built around the old one. You do not have to know. You only need to become lighter. And perhaps that is the real work of these months. Not becoming more impressive. Becoming less burdened, less afraid, less attached, less divided against yourself. So that love has more room. So that peace has more room. So that the person you truly are can breathe again. And when that begins to happen, you may realize that the future was never asking you to become someone else. It was asking you to return. Return to trust. Return to awareness. Return to forgiveness. Return to love. Return to the quiet place within you where nothing needs to be proved. And from that place, the next step becomes simpler. Not always easier, but clearer. You begin living the truth you have been trying to understand. And this is where everything you have remembered must gently move from insight into daily life. And now the question becomes very simple. How do you live this? How do you carry this awareness into ordinary mornings, difficult conversations, uncertain decisions, lonely evenings, and all the moments when the old patterns return? Perhaps you begin by releasing the idea that you must become spiritually perfect. You do not need to wake up every morning feeling peaceful. You do not need to respond perfectly to every person. You do not need to forgive everything at once. You do not need to understand every lesson while you are still living through it. You only need to remember that you can return. Return to the breath. Return to stillness. Return to the awareness beneath the reaction. Return to the part of you that does not need to win. This is enough. In the months ahead, there may be mornings when your mind begins before your body has fully awakened. The worries return. The old questions appear. What if I am running out of time? What if this never changes? What if I make the wrong choice? When that happens, perhaps you can place your attention on something simple. Your breathing, the feeling of your feet touching the floor, the light entering the room. One thing you are grateful for, not as a technique to escape reality, but as a way of returning to reality. Fear lives in imagined futures. Presence lives here. And here is where peace begins. You may find it helpful to create a few moments of silence each day. Nothing complicated. You do not need the perfect setting. You do not need to force your mind to stop thinking. You can simply sit. Allow the thoughts to come and go. Notice them without following everyone. Let silence become a place you visit often enough that it begins to feel familiar. At first, you may think nothing is happening, but something is happening. You are learning that you can exist without constantly reacting. You are discovering that your worth does not depend upon how much you accomplish in one day. You are remembering that beneath the noise, there is stillness. And each time you return to that stillness, you strengthen your relationship with yourself. Gratitude can become another doorway. Not forced gratitude, not pretending that everything is wonderful, just noticing what is already here. A warm cup in your hands, someone who cares about you, a tree outside the window, a body that has carried you through another day, a lesson you did not understand a year ago but understand now. Gratitude does not deny pain. It simply prevents pain from becoming the only thing you can see. When you practice gratitude, attention shifts. And where attention goes, your inner world often follows. This does not mean you ignore what needs healing. It means you refuse to let difficulty erase everything that remains beautiful. Forgiveness, too, can become a daily practice. Perhaps there is someone you are not ready to fully forgive. That is all right. You can begin smaller. You can say, today I am willing to carry this a little less. Maybe forgiveness happens 1% at a time. Maybe today you stop replaying the conversation. Tomorrow you release the need for an apology. Later, you realize their behavior no longer controls your mood. And one day, you remember what happened without returning emotionally to the moment. That is freedom. You may need the same patience with yourself. When you make a mistake during these months, notice how quickly the old voice appears. You should know better. You are doing it again. You never change. Pause there. Would you speak that way to someone you deeply love? Then why make cruelty the language of your inner world? Awareness can be firm without being violent. You can say, that was not how I want to respond. You can apologize. You can learn. You can choose differently next time. And then you can continue. This is how growth becomes sustainable. Not through self-punishment, through consciousness. As you move through the next 5 months, consider noticing what happens inside you when life does not obey your plans. A delay, a cancellation, someone changes their mind, a door closes. Perhaps the old impulse is to label it immediately. Bad, wrong, unfair. But what if you left a little space before deciding what the event means? You do not know the entire story yet. The road may be turning, and because you cannot see around the bend, the turn can feel like an ending. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes it is redirection. Sometimes it is simply life-changing shape. You do not need to force a positive meaning onto every difficulty. You can simply remain open. I do not understand this yet. There is peace in that sentence. It allows life to remain larger than your immediate interpretation. And this is trust. Not knowing that everything will happen the way you want. Knowing that you can remain connected to yourself even when it does not. There may be days when you forget all of this. You become reactive. You compare. You worry. You try to control someone. You revisit the past. And then eventually you notice that noticing is not failure. That noticing is awakening. The moment you become conscious of the pattern, you are already standing somewhere different. Do not waste that moment by judging yourself. Return. If you remember nothing else during the next 5 months, remember this. You can always return. You can return after an argument. You can return after a fearful night. You can return after a month of feeling lost. You can return after years of living from an identity that no longer feels true. The source does not close the door because you forgot yourself. Life keeps inviting you back. The sun rises again. The breath comes again. The present moment appears again, and again, and again. Perhaps this is one of the quiet miracles of being alive. You are continually given another moment in which to choose how you will meet life. You may begin asking yourself one question before important choices. Does this move me closer to fear or closer to love? Not easier or harder. Not more impressive or less impressive. Closer to fear or closer to love? Fear may tell you to stay silent when truth needs to be spoken. Love may ask for courage. Fear may tell you to hold on to someone who is leaving. Love may ask you to release them. Fear may tell you to prove yourself. Love may remind you that your worth is not on trial. Fear may tell you to rush. Love may ask you to wait until you can see clearly. This question can become a compass, and when you follow it imperfectly but sincerely, your life begins to feel different. You become less interested in controlling how everything appears and more interested in the quality of consciousness you bring. That is when freedom becomes real, because your peace is no longer constantly leaving with every changing circumstance. Someone can misunderstand you, and you can still know yourself. Someone can leave, and you can still remain whole. A plan can fail, and you can still trust your life. You can grow older and become more present instead of more afraid. You can face uncertainty without believing. Uncertainty means danger. This is inner freedom, not a life without change. A self that no longer needs change to stop in order to feel safe. And perhaps 5 months from now, you will look back and realize that the most important transformation was not the one you expected. Maybe your circumstances changed. Maybe they did not. But something inside you became quieter. You stopped chasing one explanation. You released one resentment. You no longer needed everyone to approve of you. You stopped comparing one part of your journey. You became more comfortable in silence. You learned to trust what you could not yet see. These changes may not look dramatic from the outside, but you will know, you will feel the difference. You will notice that your nervous system no longer tightens around the same things. You will notice that you do not need to defend yourself as often. You will notice that you can breathe inside uncertainty. And perhaps you will realize that your future was never decided by one dramatic moment. It was shaped quietly through hundreds of small moments when you chose awareness instead of reaction, love instead of fear, forgiveness instead of resentment, trust instead of control, presence instead of endless anticipation. This is how a new life begins. Not by running away from the person you have been, by understanding that person, forgiving that person, and gently allowing a deeper self to lead. So do not approach these next 5 months as a countdown. Let them become an opening, a season of remembering, a season of releasing what has become too heavy, a season of becoming intimate with stillness, a season of learning that peace does not need permission from the future. You are not waiting for life to begin. It is already here. In this breath, in this moment, in the person listening right now, there is wisdom in you that existed before the fear. There is love in you that existed before the disappointment. There is peace in you that existed before the world taught you to seek it somewhere else. You have not lost these things. You may simply have forgotten where to look. And maybe that is the deepest purpose of the journey ahead. Not to create a new self, to remember the one that was there all along. So as you move into these next months, walk gently. Listen more carefully. Forgive when you are ready. Let go when holding on begins to cost your peace. Spend a little time in silence. Give thanks for what remains. Trust one step at a time. And when fear returns, do not make it your enemy. Notice it. Hold it with awareness. Then remember that there is something within you larger than fear. Something quiet. Something loving. Something that does not need to rush. Perhaps that is the source moving through you. Perhaps that is your true self. Perhaps they were never as separate as you once believed. And 5 months from now, whatever has happened around you, perhaps the greatest gift will be this. You will know how to come home. If something in this journey spoke to a place within you that you had forgotten, Share what you are choosing to release in the comments. Your reflection may help someone else recognize something within themselves. And if you would like to continue these quiet journeys into awareness, forgiveness, peace, and the deeper self, you are welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a reminder. Until then, do not be afraid of what you cannot see yet. You do not need the whole road. You only need enough light for the step you are standing on. And perhaps, for now, that is more than enough.